the voices that won't be televised will be heard on the radio.
So now it's your time to speak up.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Today on the show with us, we have Dr. Hemchand Gossai, the director of the Georgia Southern University Center for Religious Studies. Dr. Gossai, it's an honor to have you on the show with us today.
Thank you very much.
If you could introduce yourself to us and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. As Aaron said, I am in the area of religious studies and the director for the Center of Religious Studies. This is a sort of a loosely constituted center that comprises faculty from a variety of different departments who help with the interdisciplinary minor that we have in religious studies. I'm delighted to be a part of this, and I look forward to the questions around the general topic of religion and politics.
So, Dr. Gossai, who would you say are your major religious influences?
I suppose I would categorize them in a couple of different ways, from the very sort of personal influence, let's say, of my own growing up years within the household that was where my mother was the most influential person. And in this regard, I would say some of the pillars of my own beliefs in terms of who I am as a person, as a human being, but also as a person of faith, that ideas of justice, ideas of equality, ideas of togetherness, ideas of compassion, and so on have been ideas that I think were generated in terms of my growing up years. But the second category is that over the years, in terms of persons, let's say, that are global in nature, I would say the people that have been most influential have been people such as Elie Wiesel, the Holocaust survivor and Nobel Peace Laureate.
Wrote the book Night, right?
Certainly his most well-known, his first and perhaps arguably his most influential book, Night, that chronicles, in a slim volume, but terrifyingly the sort of instructive volume about his experience in the Holocaust. But he has written a number of books, and his ideas have been very influential because he is so deeply committed to an understanding or spreading the idea that hatred has within it the capacity to absolutely destroy. And so he's been very, very influential in that regard in terms of how I see the world.
So moving right into religion and politics, how separate is church and state, or would you say church and state are, in the United States today?
Well, I mean, it is separate to the degree that there are built-in what I would call ideals with regard to the separation between church and state. And to be somewhat philosophical about it, to me, an ideal is that which we pursue. But it's also an elusive thing. And so we have this strange notion that we have an ideal that we pursue, but it's often elusive. To me, this is an ideal that is established. It is one that we pursue, on the one hand. And so we know the rhetoric of church and state, that is freedom to and freedom from, and so on. The rhetoric of one has respect and one has responsibility with regard to how one practices religion. One has rights. These are all built-in ideas. But I'm also struck by the fact that we bring who we are to this enterprise of politics. And for people who are religious, in whatever way that idea is understood and practiced, we all bring that to the enterprise of politics. The question is not whether or not we should or shouldn't. The question is, then how do we accommodate this tension between the two? And I think therein lies the challenge that we face.
Well, our next question is, do you find that there may be too much religious influence in modern U.S. politics? And given what you've just said, can religion and politics ever really be separated? And as you said, how we sort of deal with bringing our views. Some of them will be religious, and how we deal with bringing those views into politics is a large part of that sort of separation, or how we accommodate it. How do you feel we sort of accommodate it in the U.S. right now?
Well, I think, again, we bring who we are to this. Actually, we bring who we are to practically everything that we encounter. And so, on the one hand, when I hear someone say that there has to be sort of an absolute disconnect between a religion and politics, so therefore, as a Christian or as a Jew or as a Muslim, as a Hindu, I will be entirely objective. I'm somewhat skeptical about that. On the other hand, for someone to say, this is who I am and this is what I believe, and therefore, as a public servant, this is exactly however, that is equally, perhaps even much more so, problematic. So the question for me is not whether or not one could or should bring what one believes to the table, but where I struggle and I draw the line is surrounds the idea that I will take my religious beliefs and then I would craft it into policy. And I think that is where the issue becomes very, very problematic in our society. So, for example, when in recent times we've heard someone say, I believe, this is what I believe as a religious person, as a Christian person, as a Jewish person, this is what I believe. And if you were to elect me to Congress, let's say, this is what I'm going to bring to legislation. I have to say that kind of language makes me nervous, because it is not a questioning of what you believe, but should one take what one believes, howsoever deeply that is held, and maybe really profoundly important for the shaping of that person's life and family and community, but should that become policy? Should that become the basis for policy that, in effect, would affect all people that may not share those beliefs? And I think, for me, that's where I have a serious kind of questioning of how one uses religion in relationship to politics.
That kind of leads into our next question. Does government being influenced by religion affect the social class system in the United States?
Well, it does, and I think in both good and sometimes not so good ways. I think someone could argue, for example, that let's say someone says, my beliefs are such that all human beings are created equal. My beliefs are such that, in fact, I take that as my religious belief, and I connect it with what is stated as a sort of, as an ideal that we have as a nation, that we're all created equal. And how does that shape, let's say, the social fabric of our society? Well, I think it shapes, the issue of wealth and poverty. I think it shapes the issue of equality between genders. I think it shapes the manner in which perhaps we take care of each other, let's say, the poor or the marginalized. I think it shapes the manner in which we think about how we care for one another, whether that's health care or any other expression of care for the other. So how we believe and what we believe absolutely does shape the fabric of our society in a way that I believe is very important.
Are there any modern examples of religion influencing policy decisions regarding the rights of specific groups of citizens, particularly in the U.S.?
I think there's movement towards that. So, for example, one could certainly talk about the issue of abortion. It's been in the news. It obviously affects a large group of people, regardless what side one might find oneself on this topic. It affects families, and I think if we listen to some of the rhetoric actually very current right now. In this political season, we will find that some of it is being shaped pointedly by a religious belief or a belief system, and of course, if, in my view, if in fact that is allowed to happen, again, I'll give a couple of specific examples in a second. If that's allowed to happen, then it absolutely will come to shape social policy within our society. Two examples. In a recent debate between the two vice presidential candidates, Vice President Biden and candidate Paul Ryan, the question about abortion came up. These are both Catholic men, and so they have a platform that is common to who they are. Both are professed Catholic in terms of how they're shaped as human beings and how they practice. One of the things that the vice president said in that debate that I thought was instructive is that he follows the church's teaching with regard to life and when life begins and so on and so forth as an individual. And he takes it very seriously and he's committed in his life to the teachings of the church. He says, however, as an official, as an elected official, as the vice president, he does not believe it is right to bring to bear a personal belief that would make a sweeping kind of policy statement for all people, whether or not they're Catholic or whether or not they're Protestant or whether or not they do not believe in God, Muslims, Hindus, Jews. He does not see that would be, for him, not just a credible thing, but a wise and thoughtful thing to do. On the other hand, we have someone right now, recently, just this last week, congressman from Indiana who's running for the Senate, who has said that his deeply held religious belief is such that even in a pregnancy that has come about through rape, that is, in his language, a gift from God. And therefore, if one takes that to a logical kind of sort of conclusion, certainly on the road to a logical conclusion, it becomes, if you will, the basis for legislating against, if you will, anyone who would want an abortion that is generated, aborting a pregnancy is generated through rape. That person then would be criminalized. It seems to me that those are two very different ideas of how one uses one religion in terms of shaping public policy and the social fabric. And for me, so that I'm not hiding behind a veil here, it seems to me that Joe Biden's position, which I do not believe for 1 minute is necessarily a position that is only embraced on the left. I think it's a fairly sort of wide idea that is held, but it certainly stands in contrast to the latter position.